School in the 1970s was a whole different world. Kids didn't have tablets or fancy backpacks. They had pencils worn down to stubs, book covers made from grocery bags and supplies most kids today wouldn't even recognize. Back then, it was normal, but looking back now, it feels like another lifetime. Stay with us till the end of this video to look at 25 old school supplies from the 1970s, and the last item on our list would make you shake your head in nostalgia. Number 1. Big Chief writing tablets. If you went to elementary school in the 1970s, chances are you remember the Big Chief writing tablet with its bright red cover and thick-lined pages. The wide-ruled sheets were perfect for young learners practicing their penmanship, and nearly every classroom had stacks of them. By the late 80s, however, demand shrank as new paper brands took over and education standards shifted toward notebooks with narrower lines. The company eventually stopped producing them, making the Big Chief a relic of another era. And if you think bulky pads were the core 70s school supply, wait till you see the next one. Number 2. Ditto machine copies, purple ink. If you were in school during the 1970s, you'll never forget the faint purple text and the strong, almost sweet smell of freshly run ditto copies. Teachers cranked them out by hand, turning the drum until a stack of damp worksheets appeared. The ink smudged easily, and kids sometimes sniffed the pages for that odd scent. By the mid-1980s, photocopiers became faster, cleaner, and more reliable, which caused schools to abandon the ditto machine. Manufacturers gradually phased them out, and production halted altogether. And if those purple sheets defined a classroom moment, then the next thing brought lessons to life in a whole new way. Number 3. Film strip projectors. In the 1970s, film strip projectors were a big deal. The teacher would dim the lights, load a strip of tiny slides, and advance them with a loud click while reading from a script. Sometimes the film jammed or the bulb burned out, but the excitement of watching pictures on the wall broke up the routine of the day. By the 1990s, videotapes and later DVDs offered smoother storytelling, and companies stopped producing film strips altogether. And if those clunky machines brought stories to life, then the next classroom tool left a very different kind of dust behind. Number 4. Chalkboards. Every classroom in the 1970s had a chalkboard stretching across the front wall. Teachers filled them with math problems, spelling words, or long sentences to copy, while the screech of chalk made some kids cringe. Erasers left clouds of white dust, coating clothes and noses alike. By the late 1980s and 1990s, many schools replaced chalkboards with whiteboards, which were cleaner and easier to maintain. As budgets shifted, chalkboard production slowed, and most companies eventually abandoned them. Still, that green or black surface carries countless memories of learning. And just when you thought chalk was simple, schools added a splash of color. Number 5. Colored chalk packs. In the 1970s, a box of colored chalk felt like magic compared to the plain white sticks used daily. Teachers pulled them out for art lessons, special diagrams, or to brighten up bulletin boards. Kids loved the blues, reds, and yellows that stood out boldly on the dark surface. Over time, though, dust concerns and the move toward whiteboards reduced demand. By the early 2000s, most major companies stopped making large packs, leaving them a memory of a more colorful classroom. And if those rainbow smudges brightened lessons, then the next supply brought a very different smell and texture into schools. Number 6. Mimeograph paper. If you sat in a 1970s classroom, you probably remember the slightly damp bluish sheets from the mimeograph machine. Teachers used special waxed stencils, and each copy carried that unforgettable smell that clung to your hands. The process was messy and slow, and the paper often smudged or curled. Once photocopiers became affordable and far more efficient in the 1980s, schools quickly left mimeographs behind. By the early 1990s, manufacturers stopped producing the stencils and fluid altogether, ending their era. And if those inky pages marked school life for decades, then the next supply helped keep every assignment neatly organized. Number 7. 3-ring hole punchers. In the 1970s, every kid knew the clunky 3-ring hole puncher. It sat heavy on the teacher's desk, ready to chomp holes into worksheets so they could slide neatly into a binder. The lever sometimes stuck, and the tiny paper circles ended up all over the floor. By the late 1980s, pre-punched paper and cheaper binders reduced their everyday use, and many companies shifted away from producing the bulkier metal models. Newer designs became lighter and more compact, while the originals faded from classrooms. And if those loud crunches still echo in memory, then you would love to listen to what's next on our list. Quick question: which of these school supplies do you remember using? Drop your story in the comments. We would love to feature your memories in future videos. Number 8. Carbon paper. In the 1970s, carbon paper was a common sight in schools. Slip the inky sheet between two pages, press down hard with your pen, and you instantly have a duplicate copy. Teachers used it for quizzes, and kids sometimes borrowed a sheet for homework. The pages smudged easily, leaving fingertips stained blue or black. With the spread of inexpensive photocopiers and printers in the 1980s, carbon paper lost its place, and by the 1990s, most manufacturers stopped making it in bulk. And if those messy duplicates had their charm, then the next classroom device captured voices in a whole new way. Number 9. Cassette tape recorders. In classrooms in the 1970s, the cassette tape recorder was an essential tool. Teachers used them for language lessons, storytelling, or even recording student presentations. Kids gathered around as the buttons clicked loudly. Play, rewind, or fast forward, while the tape sometimes tangled and had to be rewound with a pencil. By the late 1980s, compact discs and later digital media quickly replaced cassettes, and most companies scaled back production. Portable recorders became obsolete as schools upgraded technology, leaving them in storage closets. And if those chunky machines preserved countless classroom moments, then the next piece of equipment filled rooms with glowing images instead of sound. Number 10. Slide carousels. In the 1970s, slide carousels were a staple of classroom presentations. Teachers loaded dozens of photo slides into the round tray, dimmed the lights, and clicked through images one by one. The fan hummed, the bulb buzzed, and sometimes the slides jammed mid-lesson, earning a groan from the class. With the rise of VHS tapes and later digital projectors in the 1980s and 1990s, companies stopped manufacturing the bulky carousels and replacement parts. Though once cutting edge, they became museum pieces. And if those glowing pictures defined a generation of school days, then the next classroom essential came bound in heavy volumes. Number 11. Encyclopedia sets. Every 1970s classroom had at least one full set of encyclopedias lined up proudly on a shelf. Students flipped through the heavy volumes for homework, reports, or simply to look up random facts. Pages filled with glossy photos and maps felt like a window to the world. But as the 1980s brought more affordable paperback references and the 1990s introduced CD-ROMs and eventually the internet, sales plummeted. Publishers scaled back, and many stopped printing entire sets altogether. And if those thick books taught kids how to dig for answers, then the next school staple was far thinner, but just as important for staying organized. Number 12. Manila folders. In the 1970s, manila folders were everywhere, holding homework, report drafts, or stacks of graded papers. Teachers labeled them with thick markers, and the sturdy paper stock held up to countless hands flipping through. Over time, however, cheaper plastic binders, hanging file systems, and eventually digital storage cut into their use. By the early 2000s, many schools ordered far fewer, and several paper companies scaled back production. While you can still find them, they're no longer the classroom essential they once were. And if those tan folders helped keep chaos under control, then the next school supply permitted students to wander the halls. Number 13. Handwritten hall passes on wooden blocks. In many 1970s schools, a hall pass wasn't a slip of paper, but a chunky wooden block with a teacher's note scribbled on it. Kids carried them proudly down the hall, knowing the block was impossible to hide. They were durable, reusable, and made from scraps of wood. By the late 1980s, paper slips and later printed passes became easier and cheaper to track, so wooden versions quietly disappeared. Schools stopped making them altogether. If those clunky passes were both a badge and a burden, then the next piece of equipment clicked and clacked through countless assignments. If you're enjoying this walk through 70s classrooms, give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe. It helps us keep bringing back these memories for you. Number 14. Typewriters. Before computers made their way into classrooms, Typewriters were the tool every student learned to use. In the 1970s, rows of clunky machines filled typing classes, their keys clacking loudly while ribbons left fingers smudged with ink. Mistakes meant reaching for correction fluid or those little white strips. By the late 1980s, affordable word processors and early personal computers made typewriters less practical, and most manufacturers either downsized or shut down entirely. What once symbolized modern skills quickly became outdated. And if those rhythmic keystrokes marked an era of learning, then the next school supply on our list guided students through shelves of endless books. Number 15, library card catalogs. In the 1970s, every school library had a giant wooden cabinet filled with tiny drawers, each packed with index cards. Students flipped through them alphabetically to find a book's location, often guided by a helpful librarian. It was slow and sometimes confusing, but it taught kids how to search. As computer databases arrived in the late 1980s, card catalogs became unnecessary, and by the mid-1990s, production of new cabinets and printed cards mostly stopped. And if those drawers carried the smell of old paper and patience, then the next library memory lived inside the books themselves, stamped with every reader's name. Number 16, checkout slips inside books. Every school library in the 1970s had that little pocket glued inside the back cover, holding a slip of paper stamped with due dates. Students lined up at the desk, and the librarian pressed the rubber stamp with a satisfying thud. Over time, those slips showed a history of readers stretching back years. By the 1990s, barcode scanners and computer systems replaced the manual process, and publishers stopped including the pockets altogether. Those slips carried more than deadlines. They held memories of who read a book before you. And if you think that was nostalgic, then the next classroom tool projected lessons in a bright new way. Number 17, overhead projectors with transparency sheets. Few classroom sites were as familiar in the 1970s as the overhead projector humming in the corner. Teachers wrote on clear plastic sheets with squeaky markers, sliding them across the glowing surface while lessons appeared on the wall. Sometimes the bulb burned out mid-lesson or the fan rattled loudly, but it felt high-tech at the time. By the late 1990s, computer projectors and interactive whiteboards offered sharper, easier visuals, and manufacturers gradually stopped producing transparency sheets and replacement bulbs. And if those glowing rectangles were once a symbol of modern teaching, then the next school supply carried doodles, notes, and plenty of attitude. Number 18, peachy folders. In the 1970s, peachy folders were almost a rite of passage. Their golden yellow covers were decorated with sports figures, and kids filled every inch with doodles, phone numbers, and class notes. They weren't just for holding papers. They were a canvas for creativity. By the 1990s, as binders and flashier folders with glossy designs took over, sales of peachies dropped, and eventually the classic line was discontinued. Collectors still hunt for them, but most kids today wouldn't recognize one. And if those slim folders carried both homework and personality, then the next supply was built to keep little hands safe while cutting. Number 19, safety, scissors with blunt metal tips. For many kids in the 1970s, safety scissors were their first taste of independence. The small metal blades had rounded ends, making them less likely to poke or cut skin. They weren't sharp enough for cardboard, but they sliced through construction paper just fine. Over the years, plastic-handled versions with even softer edges became the norm. And by the 1990s, most schools phased out the old metal tip style. Manufacturers shifted entirely to newer designs, leaving the originals behind. If those sturdy little scissors marked countless art projects, then the next classroom item on our list helped kids trace perfect letters and shapes by hand. Number 20, lettering guides. Before computers handled fonts, kids in the 1970s used plastic lettering guides to make posters or title pages look neat. These thin templates had cutouts for letters and shapes, and students carefully traced them with pencils or pens. They were slow to use, and mistakes meant starting over. As desktop publishing spread in the 1980s and printers became affordable, demand for guides collapsed, and most companies stopped making them. Today, they survive mostly as curiosities for collectors. And if those little stencils added polish to schoolwork, then the next supply squeaked across plastic sheets under the bright classroom lamp. Number 21, overhead projector pens. In the 1970s, Overhead projector pens were a teacher's trusty sidekick. These special markers wrote on clear plastic sheets, leaving bold lines that glowed when projected onto the classroom wall. The ink sometimes smeared on fingers and caps were easily lost, but they turned lessons into something students could follow step by step. As digital projectors replaced overheads in the 1990s, the market for these pens dried up, and companies slowly stopped producing them. They vanished along with the machines themselves. If those squeaky markers guided many a math problem, then the next classroom system kept track of students in a mechanical way. Number 22. Punch card attendance systems. Some schools in the 1970s used punch card systems to track attendance. Each student had a stiff card that was fed into a machine, which stamped the time or left a neat row of holes. It felt official, almost like clocking in at a job, but the cards were easy to lose, and the machines jammed often. By the 1980s, roll call sheets and later computerized systems made the method unnecessary, and manufacturers eventually stopped producing the bulky devices. And if those cardboard slips were marked attendance mechanically, then the next classroom memory involved a noisy tool bolted to the wall. Number 23. Wall-mounted crank pencil sharpeners. Every classroom in the 1970s had one of these heavy metal sharpeners bolted to the wall. Kids lined up to grind their pencils, turning the crank until wood shavings spilled into the little metal tray. Sometimes the blades chewed the pencil unevenly or broke the tip, but that noisy grind was part of school life. As cheap plastic handheld sharpeners and later mechanical pencils spread in the 1980s, demand declined and many companies stopped making the sturdy wall models. That rattling sound still echoes in memory. The next classroom supply helped solve math problems without needing electricity. Number 24. Slide calculators. Before electronic calculators became cheap, kids in the 1970s sometimes learned to use slide calculators. Flat plastic tools with sliding pieces that lined up to solve multiplication, division, or conversions. They looked puzzling, but taught students how to think through math step by step. Once handheld calculators dropped in price during the late 1970s and early 1980s, schools quickly abandoned slide versions and manufacturers phased them out completely. What was once a clever aid turned into a forgotten relic. And if those sliders trained plenty of young mathematicians, then the next school supply offered a place to jot down random thoughts and doodles. Number 25. Scribble pads. On many 1970s school desks sat a small scribble pad, cheap stacks of thin paper glued at the top, meant for doodles, quick notes, or practicing spelling. Kids filled them with tic-tac-toe games, sketches, or trial runs before copying neatly into a notebook. They were inexpensive, often given away by local businesses, which made them common in schools. As sticky notes and personal notebooks grew popular in the 1980s, demand faded and most suppliers stopped printing them in bulk. Those simple pads captured restless hands and wandering minds, reminding us that even scraps of paper had a place in childhood learning. From Big Chief tablets to scribble pads, these forgotten supplies remind us how different schools looked in the 1970s. If this trip down memory lane made you smile, let us know in the comments below. And tell us your memories of school in the 1970s. It really helps us keep these stories alive. Share it with a friend who grew up the same way, and don't forget to hit subscribe. We've got plenty more nostalgic journeys waiting just around the corner.